What up, YouTube? Here with a post-fight video of the Gervonta Davis versus Frank Martin fight. Now, before I give you out a summary of what happened in the fight, I'm going to tell you out the results first. Gervonta Davis was able to successfully defend and retain his WBA lightweight title via 8th round knockout. And to sum up what happened in the fight, it was a close competitive fight till the latter end. Things really turned around, I say, after the 5th round. From 6 rounds and on, it was Gervonta Davis. And Gervonta Davis does have a reputation of being a slow starter, and Frank Martin took advantage of that factor, and Frank Martin was able to start out the fight more better and get in his groove faster than Gervonta Davis, who, as I had said, isn't known to be a fast starter. And another attribute that Frank Martin had the upper hand on was the athleticism. And Frank Martin has been noticed for his athleticism in the past. He's got a football and amateur wrestling background, and he took on the sport of boxing late, but he's shown tremendous talent with his athleticism, his footwork, his foot speed, his ring generalship, his fluidity, and his hand speed as well. And that's what led him to this point. Prior to fighting Gervonta Davis, Frank Martin was also rumored to fight Shakur Stevenson, but that fight didn't come to an agreement due to promotional differences. But this fight with Davis came to fruition because I guess it was more easier of a fight to make because it's more in-house, with Frank Martin being promoted by Errol Spence's promotion, and Errol Spence having closely working with PBC. And I believe Errol Spence still works with PBC because for his next fight, he's announced that he's going to be moving up to 154 super welterweight, and it may be versus Sebastian Fundora, who's the current WBO and WBC super welterweight champion. And Fundora is a PBC promoted fighter as well as Errol Spence, and that's who Errol Spence has been promoted by throughout his whole entire career. Though Spence has his own promotion, he works with PBC for his fights. And with Frank Martin being with Errol Spence's promotional team, that makes him also a PBC fighter. And Gervonta Davis, he's been fighting with PBC by his side throughout his career as well. Hence why this fight was a more easier fight to make happen than a Davis, not Davis, but, well, perhaps in the future we can see if Shakur Stevenson in Top Rank, and it's been said before that Shakur Stevenson is soon to be a free agent when it comes to the promotional side of things because his contract with Top Rank is soon to be expired. I don't know if Shakur Stevenson is going to jump ship to PBC to make that fight happen that everybody wants to see happen at lightweight, and that's the obvious match with Davis and Stevenson. And as I said, Martin and Stevenson was talked about before, but they couldn't fall through with the terms to make that fight happen. And here we have it. Frank Martin got to step up to the biggest stage that he has never fought at before, because prior to this he was fighting at a high level but not a known level. And Gervonta Davis has been a household name amongst the top of the boxing scene when it comes to notoriety for a while now. And Gervonta Davis having this fight versus Frank Martin, it was a huge opportunity for Frank Martin to get his name out there versus a well-known name like a Gervonta Davis. And Frank Martin, his attributes that I have mentioned before, and many other boxing experts and commentators and fans have mentioned and have noted about Frank Martin. He was gonna have the opportunity to display those talents that people has talked positively about him versus Gervonta Davis, who is considered to be one of the best pound for pound fighters in the sport of boxing right now. And he has success, did Frank Martin, by not only taking advantage of the fact that Davis isn't a fast starter, and Frank Martin was eager from the sound of the bell all the way to the end of the fight. He started to slow down in the latter rounds when Gervonta Davis got in his groove, and Gervonta Davis was able to telegraph the game plan of Frank Martin, and he took more chances. And when Gervonta Davis decided to gamble and step on the gas pedal, that's when more opportunities started to open for Gervonta Davis to launch his attacks. And Gervonta Davis, once he has his shots in there, with the power that Davis carries, it's overwhelming for all of Davis's opponent. And Frank Martin knew that, and that's what had Frank Martin in retreat mode when Gervonta Davis threw himself more out there. And with the power that he carries, and once he lands that powerful shots of his that he's made a reputation on, it tends to send his opponents backpedaling, and they tend to get on retreat mode because the power of Davis and the power that he carries in his hands once felt. And once Davis decides to step on the offensive gas pedal and come forward and get more aggressive and apply that pressure and turn up the work rate, that's when Davis looks to execute. And Davis has been a good closer. And this fight, we saw a display of that. Frank Martin does have a chin. Of course, Frank Martin isn't a dumb fighter. He is an intelligent, smart fighter. And once he had felt the power of Gervonta Davis, that's when Martin wasn't throwing as much and was more careful with his choice of punches. And what was successful for Martin in the earlier rounds was his activity, his work rate, and he was able to keep Gervonta Davis at bay with his work rate and his volume. And the fact that Martin is accurate and places his punches very well was also a helping factor that kept Gervonta Davis at bay. And Gervonta Davis couldn't feint his way in to close that distance with him and Martin for him to be in comfortable range for him to launch his shots. And with the footwork and the mobility of Frank Martin, it was hard for Davis to trap Martin and to have him at a distance where he could land a solid shot. And with Davis having trouble with that and Frank Martin landing solid, accurate shots as well, doing the more effective work and landing more flush, and Davis, he didn't have a lot of opportunity for him to find success with closing the game plan of Frank Martin, and for him to launch his game plan and to execute his game plan because of the speed and the work rate and volume and overall movement of Frank Martin seemed to be a lot for Davis to manage. And then when Davis, as I had said, decided to take risk and had summed up the pace and the rhythmic offense and overall game plan of Frank Martin with the IQ that Davis carries, that's when Davis was able to calculate and was able to gather all the information and data that he did from 5 rounds, because prior to round 6 I had this fight scored 4-1 in favor of Frank Martin. So according to my personal scorecards, Davis was trailing behind. And as I said, Davis scored a 8th round knockout to successfully defend his WBA lightweight title, and I had 7 rounds scored prior to that, and I had it still 4-3 in favor of Frank Martin. And by the way how the fight was going and the flow of the fight, it was turning around in favor of Davis, and Martin seemed to be on retreat mode, and he wasn't throwing as much. He wasn't willing to take risk. He was more getting into his shell, and it looked as if Martin was drained out of the fight, and he didn't have the enthusiasm to carry on for 4 more rounds if he was able to last all 12 rounds of the fight. Then Martin would have probably had got beat on, and because of the momentum shift, Davis would have had tallied up enough rounds for him to get a decisive decision win by how the fight was turning out to be before the stoppage. And once Davis was able to more successfully cut off the ring and close that distance and get in range for him to not only throw his shots, but to land his shots and have his power be felt, that's when things turned around, and Frank Martin was more on the cautious end, and that's when Davis started to gain more confidence. Once his power was felt, that's when Davis started to get in his groove, and that's when Davis started to look like Davis, and he wanted to exchange in a back and forth brawl type of a fight than a clinic boxing bout. And that was looking like the performance that Frank Martin would have preferred and would have liked to put on, because that style of that classic boxer puncher, counter puncher, that slick defensive fighter, hit and not get hit style is my personal favorite style of boxing when it comes to the sport of boxing. And I have no problem with fighters that have that style. And I think that style of boxing, and I'm appreciative when it comes to all styles of boxing, but majority speaking, fans tend to favor the more aggressive, high pace, high volume, high work rate, back and forth, brawl, power punch exchanging, very risky, very dangerous, very non-stamina saving type of fight. And Frank Martin wasn't trying to get involved in that style of a fight with a known power puncher like Gervonta Davis. And he had the right game plan and he was executing it. But once Gervonta Davis started to see the repetitiveness of what Frank Martin was doing, and Frank Martin wasn't changing it up, Frank Martin wasn't doing any adapting abilities. He wasn't showing adaptation and him adjusting to have Gervonta Davis guessing and at bay. He had to come out with new methods, whether it would have been him maneuvering the opposite way or him mixing it up when it comes to his rhythm of how he wants to either step on the gas pedal and keep on throwing not meaningless punches, but a lot of punches with enough accuracy and enough power and enough speed, and him being able to manage his stamina, his energy, and his enthusiasm, and his game plan, and fluctuating his game plan to keep the danger level at the lowest form possible versus a dangerous puncher like Gervonta Davis. And when Davis tended to notice that Frank Martin's game plan started to get stale, that's what gave Gervonta Davis a green light to go on attack mode and get more risky, regardless of the effective shots that Frank Martin was able to land on him. Because during the post-fight interview, and y'all saw throughout the break periods in between rounds, Gervonta Davis, he started to show marks on his face with the effective punches that Frank Martin was accumulating on Gervonta Davis. And the best punch that was a effective and the most efficient part of Frank Martin's performance in this fight was with his jab. He was able to have Gervonta Davis at bay, and he kept on peppering Davis with that jab, and that's what kept Davis off of him. And we didn't see one point in time, unless Martin was hit with a power shot from Davis, Martin wasn't lazy with his jab, and he was accurate, and he knew when to place it, and he knew how to time his punches as well. And Martin showed his ability as a true student of the game and a fighter that's still on the rise and is picking up traits that can help him in the future at gaining more success, because this isn't the end of the road for Frank Martin. It's legendary fighters, iconic fighters that have been listed as amongst one of the greatest have multiple losses on their professional boxing record, and it's still a lot of opportunities available for Frank Martin, despite his first professional defeat versus Gervonta Davis, which we saw yesterday. And Gervonta Davis, his best punch was the left uppercut, being a shorter fighter, and Gervonta Davis coming up, springing up with that uppercut, that leverage, along with the natural power that Gervonta Davis carries, has made that left uppercut a signature punch for Gervonta Davis, which he's put so many of his opponents to sleep with. And that was the key punch that had helped Gervonta Davis score this knockout victory over on Frank Martin. And he landed a few uppercuts throughout the course of the fight, as well as a lead right hook hand there and a straight left hand as well. And Gervonta Davis fires that straight left hand very fast and at very random times as well. But once Davis hits you with any of his punches and let it be a signature punch, it's very likely that Davis is going to score a knockout with his signature punches. And that's exactly what we saw this past night, last night, Gervonta Davis landing a devastating uppercut while he was pressuring Frank Martin towards the ropes. And as Martin was backing up and trying to duck the punches, and Davis does a good job at feinting against his opponents to set up landing his signature punch. And that's what he did. Once he was able to back Martin up towards the ropes and have Martin guessing with his feints and with his combinations, that's when Davis started to see signs of success, and Davis, being the smart fighter that he is, took advantage of that, and he went full throttle at it, and he got the results that he always gets and has been proving that he can score whenever he strives for it. And now Davis improves his record to 30-0 with 28 knockouts, continuing his impressive put on of performances of him being able to score highlight reel knockouts. And he was able to do that versus a former undefeated contender by the name of Frank Martin, who is still a young prospect with a lot of potential and with a good future ahead of him. And this could be a learning lesson for a fighter like Frank Martin, who can still recover and turn out to be successful and a potential future champion in the future. And he was able to display good skills in this fight. And if he continues to work on his game and continues to improve, he's got, as I said, a very bright future ahead of him. And as for Gervonta Davis, he's considered to be the number one guy at lightweight. And I see that's fair that Gervonta Davis is considered the best lightweight champion. And after Devin Haney vacated his undisputed title at 135 and decided to move up to super lightweight, where he still is a champion at 140, but that left a vacant scene amongst the lightweights, and that's what led Gervonta Davis, who was the interim WBA lightweight champion, got moved up to being the official WBA lightweight champion. And then we saw Vasily Lomachenko defeat George Gambosis in a 11th round TKO win for him to become a two-time lightweight champion. Now is the IBF lightweight champion. And then there's the WBC lightweight champion, Shakur Stevenson, who he's going to be having his first defense of his WBC lightweight title next month after his disappointing performance versus Edwin De Los Santos, and people are expecting a better bounce back performance for Shakur Stevenson after his very much criticized performance win versus Edwin De Los Santos. And then the WBO lightweight champion. Then there's the WBO lightweight champion, Dennis Baranchyk, who was able to pull off that upset victory versus two-division world champion, former super featherweight and featherweight world champion Emmanuel Navarrete. And the lightweight division still is a very lively division, amongst one of the best, one of the most competitive divisions in all of boxing. And if the champions were to attempt to unify the division and make it where there's only one champion in that division, it would be a good look for the whole sport's sake, especially with it being in the lightweight division where there's a lot of good talent. And we saw Ryan Garcia, who is now, I've heard rumors that the drugs that he tested positive for isn't considered to be performance enhancers. So we might not see Ryan Garcia be suspended, and we don't know what the official announcement is when it comes to the New York Athletic Commissions, where that fight with Garcia and Haney was hosted at. And if it turns out that Garcia doesn't have to take any disciplinary actions for him testing positive for these substances, who made a appearance after Gervonta Davis was able to defeat Frank Martin by asking Davis for another fight. And we know that Davis, after this 14-month layoff that he had, his last fight before he fought Frank Martin yesterday was his knockout win versus Ryan Garcia, and that's his most notable fight known to this day. And what many would say, the toughest opponent in Gervonta Davis's professional boxing career. If you look at Gervonta Davis's resume, Ryan Garcia is the most notable and probably, and I could confidently say, is the best quality opponent that Gervonta Davis has faced thus far in his pro boxing career. And Ryan Garcia, not making any excuses, and he said this himself, that he's not making any excuses when he says such a thing, is a reason why even before fighting Gervonta Davis, Ryan Garcia was competing at 140 and not at 135. Gervonta Davis has fought at super lightweight before. He fought Mario Barrios, who fights at welterweight, and they had that fight at super lightweight. And Gervonta Davis, who originally came up from fighting at featherweight and isn't considered to be a big guy at the division which he currently competes at, being at lightweight. And Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney, they both had to struggled to make weight when they were competing at 135, hence why they moved up to 140, where they feel more comfortable competing at that stature rather than at 135. I know it's a money-making opportunity for big money, high-profile status fighters like both Davis and Ryan Garcia, who are arguably the most well-known faces in today's day when it comes to the sport of boxing. And if they were to have another fight, it would be of a big magnitude like the first fight was, but will it be agreed upon in different terms this time? Because Ryan Garcia obviously doesn't have interest in wanting to step back down to 135, and Davis, with him coming up from featherweight and then super featherweight, lightweight, he's competed as super lightweight before. But if y'all saw the official weigh-ins, Gervonta Davis, he tends to usually come in underweight, below the 135-pound weight limit. He tends to weight around like 134, 133 more times. And that is a clear sign that Gervonta Davis, he will struggle to make weight at 140 more than he does at 135. And we can say he could have missed weight by a pound and a half or two because of that long layoff, which was the longest layoff in his professional boxing career, 14 months, as noted before. And he did say slow starting could have been due to ring rust, but as many boxing fans know, Davis doesn't have a reputation for being a fast starter. And Gervonta Davis, with his current situation, it's possible that we could see Davis fight the guys that we want to see him fight against, and that's the other champions. Obviously, the two most obvious and marquee fights that Davis can have next for him is a fight versus Lomachenko or a fight versus Shakur Stevenson, and those guys are both champions in the lightweight division. And the only difference is that both Lomachenko and Stevenson are promoted by Top Rank and not by PBC, which is a promotion where Gervonta Davis has his fights promoted by. And then there's William Zepeda, who's the number one contender according to both the WBA and the WBC. And Zepeda, he has his fights being aired on the Zone, and I believe his promoter is Matchroom or Golden Boy, one or the other. And that's not either Top Rank or PBC. And Zepeda, if he was to challenge either Stevenson or Davis, who he is number one to both of the titles held by those guys, and it's more likely that we could see a title unification bout with Top Rank and Golden Boy and Matchroom working together than to see a cross-promotional bout where PBC is involved, because PBC does more in-house fights than co-promoted fights. And that's not a healthy look for the sport of boxing. But when it comes to the financial aspect of things, that is more lucrative when it comes to that part of the game. And as for who Gervonta Davis can possibly fight next, and Gervonta Davis, his last fight before fighting Frank Martin yesterday was versus Ryan Garcia, who is promoted by Golden Boy and has his fights aired on the zone. And for a fight of that magnitude and the opportunity to make money for all the parties that are involved or were involved for that fight with Davis and Garcia, that's when cross-promotional bouts are likely to happen, when it's a fight of that magnitude that can grab not only boxing fans and sports fans' attention, but the public's. And if it's not a Shakur Stevenson or Vasily Lomachenko, and I can't remember the last fight where Top Rank and PBC had worked together, other than the Deontay Wilder Tyson Fury trilogy bouts, because Tyson Fury, when he has his fights hosted in America, that's when Top Rank is involved. And Deontay Wilder at that time was promoted by PBC, and the last time they fought for their third bout was, I believe, 2021. So that's 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And that's when Top Rank and PBC worked together. Now, Davis being at a same drawing level, if not more hyped than Deontay Wilder was, I say it's comparable, because Deontay Wilder, when he was in his prime at the height of his career, with him being a heavyweight champion and knocking out guys the way he did, much like how Gervonta Davis is currently doing still to this day. And because of that, I can say that both guys, along with the criticism that both guys face, and it's comparable, and the numbers that they were able to do, and especially if they're fighting high quality opponents that the fans are wanting them to see Davis against. And if Davis, him being the draw that he is, were to fight Shakur Stevenson or Vasily Lomachenko, who are well known, reputable, but doesn't sell as much as Gervonta Davis does. And in America, because I can't speak for England and Europe, Deontay Wilder was the A-side when it comes to drawing ability when compared to Tyson Fury. It's a similar case with Davis, Stevenson, and Lomachenko. And that's why I could see, if a title unification bout were to happen with champions that are promoted by different companies, it's those two fights. Whether Davis takes on Stevenson or Lomachenko, that's when I could see Top Rank and PBC working together to make a title unification bout happen in the lightweight division. And those are the most intriguing bouts that the lightweight division can currently produce right now. I could look at the rankings of all the title organizations. You look at the WBO, the number one ranked contender according to the WBO is the current IBF lightweight champion, Vasily Lomachenko. That fight, that title unification bout between two Ukrainian champions can easily be made, because both Baranchik and Lomachenko are promoted by Top Rank. That would be an in-house title unification bout that they can make happen. Or a Shakur Stevenson versus Vasily Lomachenko, or a Shakur Stevenson versus Dennis Baranchik. And Shakur Stevenson, I heard that he has one or two more fights left with Top Rank, and then he's a free agent. And if he goes over to PBC, he can make that fight happen with Gervonta Davis more easily without a conflict of interest, if he makes it an in-house fight with him and Davis, and that being promoted only by PBC. And as I said, the number one contender according to the WBA, is William Zepeda, who's undefeated, and the IBF had Lemos, who lost to Hitchinson in a upset competitive bout that could could have been scored either way, but I don't know if the IBF or Wikipedia has updated their rankings. Lemos is number one. I don't know if Hitchinson had replaced Lemos after defeating Lemos via decision as the number one ranked IBF contender. And Hitchinson, I'm talking about his fights being aired on the zone along with Lemos, and I don't know their promotional thing. I don't know if it's Golden Boy, I don't know if it's Matchroom, but that fight can happen more easily than a fight with the cash cow of the lightweight division, Gervonta Davis. And that's with Frank Martin. I'll put him on the same level as a Keyshawn Davis, who else is out there? Keyshawn Davis, and I wouldn't say Maxie Hughes or George Gambosis. I would say after seeing his performance versus Gervonta Davis, I would put him above a level of a former champion such as a George Gambosis or a tough contender like a Maxie Hughes. I say Frank Martin is on the level of a Jermaine Ortiz or Keyshawn Davis. Still a lot of room for Frank Martin to up his game and for him to improve on a lot of aspects that comes with the sport of boxing. And he's still a young guy. That means there is plenty of time for growth for Frank Martin. As I said, the opportunity is limitless for Frank Martin. This should be a motivator and not a setback for Frank Martin. And Keyshawn Davis, as far as he goes, and Jermaine Ortiz, those guys fluctuate between super lightweight and lightweight as well. And Keyshawn Davis is amongst the top 10 lightweights according to, I believe, the WBO, but he's already moved up to super lightweight, and same for Jermaine Ortiz. So there's guys that are there in the lightweight division that's ranked amongst the top lightweight contenders but have moved up to super lightweight. And if they do decide to move down back to lightweight, which is highly unlikely, they have a title opportunity there as well as they do at super lightweight. And then there's, as I said, guys such as Zepeda, Lemos, Hitchinson, Gambosis, Hughes, and there's guys like veterans like Lee Shelby. There's guys like Muratalla, Cully, Cruz, and names like that are amongst the top of the lightweights. And any of those guys are capable of putting on a good fight for any of the titles that is in the lightweight division right now. And obviously, the fight that I want to see Gervonta Davis fight next would be a title unification bout versus any of the champions in the lightweight division. And Gervonta Davis did say that he doesn't want to have a long layoff like he did heading into this fight. And whatever he had going on, circumstances outside of the ring that could have affected this layoff, I don't like touching on those subjects because that has nothing to do with the sport of boxing. Never mix professional things with personal things, and there's that boundary when it comes to talking about these things when you're diving into the journalism field. And he did say that he wants to stay as active as he can. So hopefully, based on what he said, we see him before this year ends. And it won't make sense for Gervonta Davis to step down from the ladder of competition. If you look at his most recent fights, he's fought higher quality opponents as he makes his climb as one of the elite fighters in the current days of boxing. Frank Martin, undefeated fighter prior to yesterday. Ryan Garcia, undefeated prior to his defeat versus Gervonta Davis. Rolando Romero and Isaac Cruz, Leo Santa Cruz, Hector Luis Garcia, just to mention a few, his recent opponents. Other than Rolando Romero, high quality opponents. And not to discredit Romero because he was a former world champion. And all those guys that I named has been profiled as high quality championship level undefeated fighters. And Tank Davis, other than Isaac Cruz, was able to blow him out the ring with highlight reel knockouts. And not to take credit away from Isaac Cruz for putting on such a good fight versus Gervonta Davis and not excusing Gervonta Davis' performance versus Isaac Cruz. Gervonta Davis did say that he hurt his hands. And that tends to be fighters, I'm not going to say excuse because I don't know if Gervonta Davis hurt his hands and I don't know if Shakur Stevenson hurt himself versus Edwin De Los Santos in their fights. I'm talking about Davis for that Cruz fight and Stevenson for his De Los Santos fight. And they both said when they were criticized with their performances because they didn't live up to the expectations that fans was expecting out of them, that they were faced with injuries. And there's always on and off days. That's what comes with the sport, and that resembles life. And with that being said, Gervonta Davis, he was still, despite his injury, able to fight Isaac Cruz and go toe-to-toe with him. And Isaac Cruz is a champion at super lightweight, and he did that versus a common opponent that Gervonta Davis had also defeated, and that being Rolly Romero. And him knocking out Rolando Romero is the least skilled out of all the opponents that Davis had defeated in his recent times. But Romero still had that same reputation that a Frank Martin had. I wouldn't say Frank Martin and both Romero are on the level of Ryan Garcia was when heading into the fight versus Gervonta Davis, because Garcia, when it comes to notoriety, he was up there on the same level as Gervonta Davis, hence why the turnout for that event turned out to be so successful. And Frank Martin, him being an undefeated prospect, as was Romero, but Martin obviously displayed him being the technical, better, more skilled fighter than Romero was. Frank Martin, he has the ability to talk his eye out there, but he is more structured with it. And Rolando Romero, he tends to have an outlandish personality, and his antics outside of the ring has what fans drawn to him. And him getting an opportunity to face a fighter like a Tank Davis gave an opportunity for Romero to make himself marketable to the crowd. And that's the luxury that a fighter like a Davis has with the reputation that Davis carries. And that's why I said, you look at Leo Santa Cruz, Hector Cruz, they were champions. And Martin Garcia, Romero, unbeaten. Isaac Cruz, not that known, but we know now after his performance versus Tank, it wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a miracle performance. It wasn't based on luck. Cruz, he is one of the most rugged, tough fighters a champion in the super lightweight division, a talent to most certainly to look out for, and it won't make sense for Davis to fight a lackluster opponent and step down in the ladder competition when he's on this uppity slope. And I mentioned that because PBC, who tends to be the hardest promotional company to work with when it comes to non-in-house fights and a cross-promotional bout, I can't name a top level, top tier, upper echelon contender that is promoted by PBC that Tank Davis can defend his WBA lightweight title versus next. Especially basing things off of what Davis said following this fight, with him wanting to stay active and not have a duration of a layoff where he takes a break for more than half of a year for him to fight again. And he did say that ring rust, he felt it throughout the earlier rounds, but he was able to get into his groove and fight the fight that he wanted to fight as the fight progressed. And he doesn't like that ring rust feeling, and for a fighter that is of his caliber, it's a good look for him to stay active, and it's a bad look for him to not be active and not be busy, especially with the champion and the reputation that Tank Davis has. And as I said, the obvious marquee match for Davis would be a title unification bout versus any of the champions at lightweight. And obviously, as I said before, the fight that the majority want to see more than any other title unification bout would be that title unification bout with Davis and Stevenson. And it's rumored to be that Stevenson's contract is going to be up with Top Rank after 1 or 2 more fights. If Stevenson jumps shift to PBC, that could be an all PBC affair with Davis and Stevenson. And I could see that happening sometime in the future. And there is a lot of potential that could be made out of that fight. The same, if not the same, more hype than the Davis-Garcia fight had, because Stevenson is undefeated. Davis was able to defeat Garcia, and it'll be for a unification title bout and one of the best divisions in the sport with 2 in-prime American fighters. And obviously with both fighters being U.S.-based fighters, that means that this fight is going to be hosted in America with 2 U.S.-based fighters. And if he fights Lomachenko, that'll still be a big fight, because Lomachenko is already a reputable fighter that once held the reputation of being considered the best fighter in all of boxing at one point in time. And there's Dennis Baranchyk as well. And if Stevenson has one more fight after his next fight, I'd like to see him fight with either Baranchyk or Lomachenko, but more so Lomachenko, because that's more of a marketable bout, because Lomachenko is more known than Baranchyk is. And I say notoriety-wise, on a global scale, I say they're almost equal, Stevenson and Lomachenko. And that fight, if Stevenson does in fact have one more fight left with Top Rank, then that fight with Lomachenko can be very likely to happen, and it would be a all in-house Top Rank affair, and it'll most likely be hosted in America, because Lomachenko, he's had majority of his major bouts held in America, and Stevenson being a U.S.-based fighter and Lomachenko having had plenty fights hosted in America, that's why that fight would be a lucrative bout to make happen, a title unification bout in the lightweight division. and it'll be an easy fight to make happen for Top Rank if there is no contractual issues. And the most likely for that Stevenson Davis fight to happen, Stevenson will most likely have to jump ship to PBC to clear away all disputes if it be a cross promotional bout. I think how it's played out in the past, if I was a betting man, I would be confident to say for that Stevenson Davis fight to most likely happen, Stevenson had to wait out his contract to expire with Top Rank, and then he could jump banners to PBC to make that fight with Davis happen sometime in the future. And with that being said, as far as Frank Martin goes, he is still a top prospect and he still has a lot of potential. He still has a lot of room to improve and up his game. And as I have said, man, a loss doesn't make a man. And hopefully he bounces back from this, and hopefully he makes improvements and adjustments and ups his game and catapults himself to yet another title contention. And as I have said, man, there's still limitless amounts of opportunities for Frank Martin and fighters alike to improve themselves. And look at Ryan Garcia, for example. His loss to Gervonta Davis didn't hurt his reputation at all, and he was able to bounce back, and that means so can Frank Martin. And with that being said, that does it for this post-fight video, y'all. Subscribe to this channel if y'all want. Click the like button, the share button if y'all want to share content and show support for this channel and the algorithms thereof. And click the links in the description to show y'all support for this channel. And I'm out of here, y'all. Be good and peace.